Key point 1. The importance of memory declined throughout history. Nowadays, we remember very little and find it difficult to commit things to memory. For example, how often do we forget important birthdays or where we left the car keys? Yet, we humans didn't always have the attention span of a chicken. Memory was once humanity's most important asset. Today, we write things down precisely so we don't have to hold them in our memories. But before the invention of writing and other technologies of visual representation, humans could count on nothing but their ability to memorize. In fact, the only way to preserve thoughts and ideas was to memorize them. But everything changed after Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, circa 1440. It all went downhill from there. The need to commit things to memory no longer existed. It was now possible for almost everybody to have a stream of unending memories written down, fixated forever. They just needed to remember where they wrote the information or idea. Say things you need to remember out loud, or write them down to reinforce the memory. The inception of supercomputers, smartphones, and the internet has even worsened the situation. Memory has become even less important to the current generation than to those in the previous century. Having Google at our service, our need shifted from remembering to knowing how to find the right information. The good news is, just because our memory is bad now, doesn't mean we can't improve it. All we have to do is learn how to use our memory capacity efficiently. In this summary, we'll examine some powerful techniques you can use to commit anything to memory. Key point 2. Build your own memory palace. Ad Herennium, the oldest Latin book on rhetoric, distinguishes between two types of human memory, natural and artificial. In addition to the natural memory we were born with, we can modify artificial memory via practice and training. Engage in brain-stimulating activities like puzzles, reading, or learning a new skill for better memory. The memory palace technique works with our artificial memory, images, things you want to remember, and places that store these images. Remembering works great when it starts by creating a space in your mind, and then filling it with images representing things you want to remember. For instance, you can try a memory palace technique to remember a long list. Here's how to go about it. 1. Think of a place with which you are intimately familiar. Your childhood home, for instance. 2. Visualize yourself on the porch and envision the first thing on your list lying next to the door. Let's take a chocolate bar as an example. Imagine smelling it or tasting it to make the image vivid. Then imagine walking into your house and seeing the next thing on your list on the carpet. Now step into the house and look at the corridor. What do you see? Recall this place in your home in all of its details. Now put the next object on your list in the middle of the corridor. Number 5. Repeat with the remaining items on your list, diversing as much of the house as necessary. Envision and remember each of the items with all of your senses. So imagine how it feels to touch and smell before placing each item at its locus. If it's something edible, taste it and remember its flavor. The brighter the imprint of the image, the better your memory will stick to it. Feel free to let your images be as lewd as possible, whether it's associating them with humor or sex. It is forgetting, not remembering, that is the essence of what makes us human. Joshua Foer. Did you know one memory champion once memorized the entire Oxford Chinese English Dictionary by using his body parts as places where he stored all 60,000 words? Key point 3. Memorizing long bits of information made easy. In 1956, George Miller, a Harvard psychologist, created a new chapter in the history of memory research, talking about human limits on processing information. As he found out, the human brain has limited information capacity. We can only think of 7 things simultaneously. If anything new comes into the mind, it enters a state of temporary limbo, in what's known as working memory. The working memory stores information at the current moment, limited by 7 things at a time. Our waking memory makes up our perception of the world at the present moment, and only a few things go on to be processed into our long-term memory. If our long-term memory instantly kept everything we had, we'd be drowning in irrelevant information. However, the problem with our working memory is that it is significantly constrained. It can hold a limited amount of information at a time, sometimes for several seconds, only if we're distracted. So how do we move something from working memory to long-term memory? Repetition. When we want to commit any thought or information to our long-term memory, we need to repeat it over and over again. Even if our working memory is limited, we can skip that stage and process information into our long-term memory. The chunking technique can help accomplish that. Group individual information into larger patterns to process, to remember it better. It's a challenge for anyone to memorize a large amount composed of 12 digits at a glance. Now try chunking it into 4 parts and merge them into 2 dates. For example, if your number is 150699090369, turn it into 2 recognizable dates, 150699 and 090369. Now you can see they're almost impossible to forget. Chunking can help you process the information into your long-term memory by turning it into easily memorized patterns. You can recognize letters by chunking them too. Memorizing 15 letters at a continuous string such as RIGHTUPLEFTDOWN is a way more complicated than splitting it into separate chunks, right, left, up, down, and taking it from there. Key point 4. Turn people into vivid images. It might help your memory. When it comes to remembering information, one of the things the vast majority of us find pretty difficult to remember is other people's names. Remembering names, especially after a swift initial encounter, can be tricky. Fortunately, there's a simple trick for making names more memorable. Try to associate the sound of a given name with a clear and bright image in your head. This exercise involves active work with your sensory memory here. Create a visual association between the person's face and their name. If you attempt to recall their name later on, the image tied to the visual representation of this person's face should activate their name in your memory. Memory is like a spider web that catches new information. The more it catches, the bigger it grows. And the bigger it grows, the more it catches. Joshua Foer. To get deeper into this technique's workings, let's look at the Baker-Baker paradox. The experiment goes like this. First, one of the participants sees a photo of a man. A researcher tells him this man is a baker. A second participant in a separate room is told something different, that the man's last name is Baker. After several days, the first and second participants see the photograph again. The researcher asks each for a word they associate with this man in the photo. The trick is that the first participant is more likely to recall Baker by identifying his profession. The other person will have a harder time recalling his surname. We are more likely to forget words through a surname link. Same picture, same word, different methods of remembering. How did that happen? If you hear this man as a baker, it's much easier for you to envision many images adjacent to his profession. Whether you imagine the smell of fresh bread or his early working mornings at the bakery, many mental pictures burst into your mind. This vivid image makes the associated fact much easier to remember. The only bond you have with the word baker is recollecting that person's face or facial expression. No images come to mind. So it's easy for the name to escape our short-term memory. So if a guy says his name is Reagan and you want to commit the name to memory, imagine a guy carrying a huge ray gun during your first meeting. Come up with straightforward visual associations to remember names easily. Key point 5. Use your imagination to aid your memory. How does one memorize something as abstract as poetry or long texts? According to Joshua Foer, there are 2 general strategies for committing lengthy abstract texts to memory: methodical and emotional. The methodical memorization strategy uses images to represent each word or sentence in a lengthy text. For instance, to memorize prose and poetry, follow these steps. First, read a set of lines to get the essence and meaning of it. Then create an image that captures that set of lines. Assign the image to a particular locus in your memory palace. Similarly, when you come across words that are difficult to recall, create compelling images in your mind for each word. Now place each image in your memory palace. What about words like and, self, and the, which are hard to visualize? Here you can attempt something even more creative. Associate each word like that with a rhyme that is easy to imagine. For example, one memory athlete associated these words with images in his native German language. And rhymed with the German Rund, so he connected it to a round circle. The drew the association with a knee, rhyming it with the German Knee. Games like chess can improve strategic thinking and memory. A more advanced technique for memorization dates back to the 14th century, when an English mathematician invented the syllable method. It starts with chunking the word into syllables, coming up with a word that begins with the same syllable, and then connecting it to an image. So, for example, the word winter can become something like winning territory if you associate it with a picture of a king winning over new territories for his kingdom. The emotional strategy is the second method for memorizing long texts. Connect words to your feelings instead of images. The technique is similar. Split a longer text into several chunks, and then associate smaller pieces with different emotions. Drastil, another memory athlete, uses this method to connect longer texts to how she feels when reading them. Emotional strategy is especially great for memorizing poetry, as it makes you feel an array of things you can easily associate with certain lines. You can imagine how the writer feels, whether cheerful or devastated, and use it to connect back to your memory. Key point 6. Fortify your memory palace with the major system. Apart from chunking, there is another interesting technique you can use to memorize numbers, harnessing the power of your memory palace. This technique is known as the major system. The major system is a code to convert numbers into consonant phonetic sounds, which can turn into words and vivid imagery for a memory palace. Here's the code. 0 equals S, Z, or C. 1 equals T or D. 2 equals N. 3 equals M. 4 equals R. 5 equals L. 6 equals NG or J or ZH or CH. 7 equals K or Q or QU. 8 equals F or V. And 9 equals P or B. So 43 would become RM, 44 would be RR, and 45 RL. Now fill them with vowels to make meaning out of these two letters. It's how 43 can become your room. 44 would turn into a tiger saying R, and 45 would represent some kind of rule. Similarly, 83 might be about fame, while 65 would stand for a cherry. You can also enlarge those strings if you need to remember longer numbers. That's how you can quickly transform 15214 into a calendar, or 230981 into a man drinking his cup of tea. That's how a major system actively evokes the power of your imagination, by creating a story through association. Engage in artistic activities. Painting, drawing, or sculpting can stimulate the brain. What about huge strings of numbers, like the whole number of pi? In this case, the contestants of the U.S. Memory Championship would use a more sophisticated technique known as Person Action Object, or PAO. PAO implies that every two-digit number connects to the image of a person doing something with an object. The number 44 will be Thor, a person, hammering, an action, hammer, an object. Likewise, 28 would represent David Beckham kicking a soccer ball, or 32, Picasso painting Mona Lisa. If you need to remember a longer number, combine all of it. For example, the person from the first number performs an action from the second with the object from the third. That's how 44, 28, 32 can quickly become a strange but easily recognizable image of Thor kicking the Mona Lisa. With the PAO system, you don't have to come up with primary associations. You just memorize what each number corresponds to. But once you do, unique combinations pop up in your head whenever you try to represent and remember a longer number, creating a powerful association through a story. Conclusion. The art of memorizing has declined dramatically since ancient times when we had nothing to do with thoughts than to remember them. There were no alphabets for the visual representation of words, nor were there notes and pens. You only had one way to preserve and pass the information on: memorizing it. To transmit ideas, you first had to remember them. With the invention of writing, we started using it to avoid memorizing. That's how the idea of books as tools to help our memory became a memory replacement mechanism. Before 200 BC, all texts were strings of words that ran together in a continuous series of capital letters. Things were written mainly to help the writer memorize them. Reading was useless if you didn't already know what you were reading. However, memory has become even less important to the current generation than it was to those in the previous century. With the inception of the internet and supercomputers, we all now have a collection of millions of written down memories, so easily accessible to us. We rarely have to remember anything anymore. With the right search terms, anyone can access tons of information online. Fortunately, our memory capacity isn't fixed. Using the techniques and practices discussed in the summary, you can expand your mnemonic capacity beyond what many people can imagine and achieve extraordinary memory skills. Try this. Use images and emotions to your advantage. Whenever you want to memorize something, say a text, break it down into segments and assign each part a vivid image or emotion. It will make whatever you wish to retain more memorable and easier to recall. You can also attempt each memorization method described in this summary and see which works better for your memory.